was a good friend.
And let's listen to Pavarotti. Put on Pavarotti.
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. As a disclaimer, this channel is for entertainment purposes. These are my opinions, and I'm not here to slander. So I will be providing information. I will be speculating on the information that I provide, and all of the thoughts and opinions are mine and mine alone. So let's get started. This is part 3 of my series on the DNA on the knife sheath. In the first 2 episodes, I educated you on aspects of DNA profiling, DNA itself. If you haven't watched part 1 and part 2, stop this video, go back and watch them before you watch this so that it makes sense. If you have watched part 1 and part 2, then you may proceed with me. In this episode, we're going to talk about possible nefariousness as it relates to the match of the STR sample from the knife sheath to the buccal swab from Bryan Kohberger, and the reverse engineering in a very speedy way of the family tree of the IgG after they had Bryan Kohberger's name, which was their cheat code in this. So without further ado, let's roll.
Our law enforcement agencies having unbreakable good character and fight hard to let the thoughts in that they are mere mortal humans in the end, and subject to not only make mistakes, but to in fact act in criminal ways themselves. Even the lab personnel aren't above acting in this manner. When we dive into the history of the FBI crime lab as it relates to DNA, we see a pattern that encompasses decades of manipulation of results related to DNA.
Here we go, folks. This is the DNA part 3. And as I showed you in the previous videos, the difference between the partial degraded sample and the undegraded good samples of STR profiles. Now, what do I believe happened in the Kohberger case? If law enforcement had a partial sample of the STR profile, and then they somehow obtained samples of the suspect's father and mother, and they created complete STR profiles of both, they could then use those 2 profiles to actually transfer the alleles from the father and the mother into the partial sample in order to complete it. This is not a difficult thing for them to do because of multiple source DNA profiles. You see, anytime there's multiple sources, the DNA profiles, when they expand them and look at them, it will have several different tandems of alleles. And that's how they know there's more than one perpetrator. But their techniques they've developed over the years actually will separate those perpetrators into one individual profile. Scientists have developed computer programs that it's a simple computer program, but it uses statistical and biological models to help interpret complex DNA mixtures. So by the use of a simple computer program, they can complete that partial DNA sample. And the defense was well aware of this, I assure you. But again, the scientists, they've developed computer programs that use statistical, remember that word, and biological models to help interpret complex DNA mixtures. Those are key words in this. Remember them. Because this is out of the court documents for the defense as it relates to the DNA. And I believe they were alluding to this from the very beginning. And you can see it says, additionally, the defense team has discussed the use of statistics in this type of case with experts who have informed defense counsel that the manner of identifying Mr. Kohberger via this type of search may have significant impacts on the statistical analysis of the CODIS profile generated by the Idaho State Police Lab. Without access to the actual genetic genealogy search methods and results, it's impossible for qualified experts to address these issues. I believe they were setting the stage for what I am describing to you in this video. And that was from Bicka Barlow. Now let's look at Stephen Mercer. Mercer testified that an SNP profile can shed light on the reliability of an STR profile. But first, one needs to know how the SNP profile was obtained, the lab process, the family tree, and who on the family tree was not tested for STR purposes. So what he is alluding to here is they want to know exactly how the SNP profile came about so that they could then verify if the SNP profile is indeed real. Then they can verify the authenticity of that STR profile they used to match to Bryan Kohberger and ensure that it wasn't manipulated in the process in which I am describing in this video. They're well aware of it. Now, how did they get his mother and father's DNA profile, you ask? On December 27, 2022, Pennsylvania agents recovered the trash from the Kohberger family residence located in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. That evidence was sent to the Idaho State Lab for testing on December 28, 2022. The Idaho State Lab reported that DNA profile obtained from the trash and the DNA profile obtained from the sheath identified a male as not being excluded as the biological father of suspect profile. Right, but they got the trash from the family residence. There is no doubt the mother's DNA was extracted from that trash also. And before I get to my next point, I want to address this just for a moment. We all hear the reports about them seeing Bryan Kohberger separate his trash from his parents' trash and then deposit it in his neighbor's trash can. They would have had to have witnessed this prior to the arrest of Bryan Kohberger. I think you would agree. So logic would tell us that they would have witnessed it as they took this trash that they took to the Idaho State Police Lab. Well, if they knew he separated his items from his parents' trash and put it in the neighbor's trash can, why wouldn't they have just gone to the neighbor's trash can and taken that trash and obtained Bryan Kohberger's DNA instead of going through all the trouble of extracting his father's and, as I'm suggesting, his mother's? Let that sink in for just a minute. But as I mentioned in the last video, any good attorney, what they do is they find the policy procedures on anything involved, especially in this matter where it refers to the Idaho State Police Lab, and ensuring they were followed, and that's very important. And I just want to say great job to Yoli. And let me share an excerpt from a video Yoli did recently.
Lab, and I'll put links to this in the description box. But what I found was the procedures for the Idaho State Lab. ISPFS evidence analysis turnaround, and this is from the Idaho State Police. So this is the turnaround time. And it lists the services: alcohol, volatiles, breath alcohol, controlled substance, biology screening, sexual assault kits, DNA database, and so on. And it goes to latent print comparison and urine toxicology. Okay, so this was data as of 9/3/24. So as of 9/3/24, the average turnaround goal in days, this is the goal, was for DNA testing was 30. Currently, and we're talking as of 9/3/24, the turnaround time for DNA was 64 days. Now, we don't know what it is, what it was back in November or December of 2022. But it looks like every 4 years, they say 2020, and it talks about wait a second, cases completed. No, they don't. So let's see. It talks about the cases completed and the number of items, but it doesn't talk about the turnaround time. So the only turnaround time that we have is as of 9/3/2024. So one of the things that I would want to know is if in December 27th or 28th, whenever the trash was received by the lab.
So my conclusion as it relates to the STR profile match from the knife sheath to Bryan Kohberger's buccal swab is this. The Idaho State Police Lab had from the 28th of December till the 5th of January to create both the father and mother's STR profiles, then with the use of statistics via their computer program for separating multi-source DNA profiles and interpreting the results, they were able to complete the partial profile and match it to Bryan Kohberger's buccal swab obtained on January 5th by the FBI. I'm currently looking for the FBI standards of procedure when collecting trash in Pennsylvania, and they should have procedures, and I believe their procedures would have told them not to fly it back to the Idaho State Police Crime Lab. I believe it would have required them to take it to the FBI Crime Lab, but until I find those procedures, I can't say for sure. But as you can see, by taking that partial sample and completing it with Kohberger's mother and father's alleles, they could then match it to the knife sheath. That is my opinion, speculation of what took place as it relates to the STR profile match. Now, we've got to discuss the IgG family tree and how that came about. And let me show you the piece of proof that I believe explains the IgG better than I can. You can see it was a race to complete the family tree using Kohberger as the cheat code for the IgG to legitimize it. And this is out of the IgG court dockets in the declaration of Bicca Barlow. And I want you to pay close attention. I'm going to read it. The state describes law enforcement's use of IgG in this case as follows. Investigators used IgG to begin the process of developing a lead to the individual who left DNA on the K-bar knife sheath. Idaho State Police utilized a private laboratory to develop an SNP profile from the DNA on the K-bar knife sheath. The private laboratory started using genetic genealogy to develop a family tree. But after law enforcement decided the FBI would take over, the private laboratory ceased its efforts and sent the SNP profile to the FBI. The FBI uploaded the SNP profile to one or more publicly available genetic genealogy services to identify possible family members of the suspect based on shared genetic data. The FBI could then view through the Genetic Genealogy Services portal information regarding potential relatives of the suspect who left DNA on the K-bar knife sheath. Based on information, the FBI could see the Genetic Genealogy Services portal. The FBI went to work building family trees, plural, of genetic relatives to the suspect's DNA left at the crime scene in an attempt to identify the contributor of the unknown DNA. The FBI built the family tree using the same tools and methods used by members of the public who wish to learn more about their ancestors. For example, FBI consulted social media, viewed vital records such as birth and death certificates, and viewed other information already contained in the user portal for the genetic genealogy service, including unverified information submitted by other users of the genetic genealogy service. The FBI also consulted subscription-based databases available to law enforcement for information on individual people. The product of the genealogy conducted by the FBI was a family tree that contained the name, birth date, and death date, if applicable, of hundreds of relatives, as well as their familial connections between each other and the suspect, Bryan C. Kohberger. The FBI then sent local law enforcement a tip to investigate defendant. Now, the last statement in here is the most important statement. Everywhere in here, they've talked about an unknown DNA, suspect DNA, but at the very end, all of a sudden, it contains hundreds of relatives as well as their familial connections between each other and the suspect, Bryan C. Kohberger. You see, they couldn't have completed the family tree that fast without the cheat code, which was the name of the suspect, Bryan C. Kohberger. And that is what Bicca Barlow was alluding to in that statement right there. Now, I know we don't want to believe that the FBI and the little state labs would do anything this nefarious. I mean, if they would, you know there would be a history of them doing this. And I mean, is there one?
Would the FBI and state lab personnel assist in the manipulation of DNA results in order to gain convictions? One only has to do minimal research to find it happens too often to count. The FBI DNA labs have been under investigation and scrutiny for decades due to this underhanded practice. Many state labs have fallen into the same mindset of get a conviction. With this mindset, the most powerful tool in garnering convictions, DNA evidence, has sent many innocent people to prison over the years, and the terrible practice continues to this day.
So the things that I hope you took away from this episode is, number one, the IGG was completed with a cheat code, with Bryan Kohberger named as the suspect. That means that something else led them to Bryan Kohberger. I've been screaming it from the rooftops for a long time. It is confidential informants. A simple, open-minded study of Bill Thompson's response to the alibi, where he states that he needs time to put together a list of witnesses to place the defendant at the scene, should tell you everything you need to know about the real confidential informants. But still to this day, I hear people say, yeah, but those could be technical, expert witnesses testifying on the cast data or other technical aspects. Folks, if you read that same response, Bill Thompson says there is no phone data during the atrocity. Nothing. No cell phone cast data, no phone data. There isn't an expert witness that could be called to testify to any type of location data for Bryan Kohberger. When he says put together a list of witnesses, that's exactly what he means. He means actual people, folks. Those are informants. You got to understand that at this point. But in part 4 of this series, that's where things are going to get real. Because I'm going into the atrocity itself, the crime scene itself. And I'm going to prove to you not only that that's not Bryan Kohberger's knife sheath, I'm going to prove that it's likely not the assailant's knife sheath at all. And I'll also prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that more than one perpetrator committed the atrocity on Keene Road, with the evidence that the prosecution has presented at this point, an actual crime scene breakdown to show the only way that the evidence that the prosecution has brought forth is even possible. And that one will be eye-opening, I assure you. But until then, please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, your thoughts, your criticisms. Be good, kitty. Nice kitty. Till next time, Pavarotti's out.